What's up? Welcome in to the latest episode of Pod Like a Champion, the blueandgold.com recruiting podcast. I'm Patrick Engel, joined as always by our recruiting insider at blueandgold.com, Mike Singer. Mike, I know we've talked about it before, at least for our YouTube audience, but for the podcast, is the first time we're recording since Notre Dame got its 2022 quarterback commit. So shouts to you for covering your first quarterback commitment in your time here, because Tyler Buchner committed before either of us was at Blue and Gold.
Yeah, it's about
About that.
time. It was a long one, but yeah, it's exciting now. And I'm really pumped to go out and see him throw some more, cover him recruiting because like Buckner wasn't a super like on the trail vocal recruiting guy. Like he had his few guys and he recruited them hard. And Jelly's gonna be a little bit more of a casting a wide net. Might I even say a little bit wider of a net than even Blake Fisher cast. So excited to see. Look, recruits are never going to pick a school based on another recruit. Like, recruiting them, like, maybe a package deal happens every once in a while. But I think Angeli might have a nice positive impact on the trail for Notre Dame. And, just being a voice of a young man their age.
So let's touch on all of that, both Angeli as a player and recruiter. But first, before we dive into that, I want to make sure you guys are subscribed to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit that subscribe button right there. It just takes one click. Hit that thumbs up button if you'd be so kind. And if you subscribe to us, of course, that's where you can find all of our other videos, including Mike's recent interview with Oradell and by the time you're listening to this, I assume published interview with former Notre Dame quarterback Ian Book. And of course, for our podcast audience, if you're listening on podcast, make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And for anybody, tell your friends about us. We can't tell that enough. If you like what you're listening to and like what you're watching, tell your friends. We'll love you forever. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. Follow me at Patrick Engel _, and you can follow Mike at Rivals _Singer. So, Mike, Steve Angeli, Notre Dame's first quarterback offer in the 2022 cycle last August. And in March, he's committed, a position that had plenty of intrigue and was going to be the most interesting considering Notre Dame couldn't go watch any of them in person. That's all wrapped up. So I'm just going to give you the floor. Your thoughts on Angeli and his commitment.
There's like 90 different ways to go here. And I've been on, 96.1 FM and South Bend talking about this with Darren Pritchett on Sports Beat. Our articles at blueandgold.com, our YouTube channel. So I'm like trying to think of a new angle to kind of discuss here. And I think one thing Notre Dame fans like to discuss the most is like, all right, there's the talent aspect, but for the most part, we can all agree that we don't know. Like we don't know about really any of these recruits, but especially at the quarterback position. It's a crapshoot, especially during this, about to be year-long dead period. And so let's touch on like the recruiting aspect of Notre Dame at the quarterback spot. You did offer Angeli early. You offered Gavin Wimsatt the same day, so really 1A, 1B in terms of when they offered those two guys. That's Gavin Wimsatt from Kentucky. And then you offer Ty Simpson in January. He goes to Alabama. And then the really interesting one was Drew Allar. And my contacts had expressed to me that it was likely going to be Angeli or Allar. I'm not 100% sure what ended up happening with Gavin Wimsatt, but that kind of tailed off. I think Notre Dame wanted to have him on campus. Of course, it's the dead period, so that there's nothing they could really do to get him there officially and pay for his way there, or even if he was able to come, like it would just be for him to walk around. There's nothing that they could do to actually interact with him or anything while he's on campus. But so I think, Wimsatt and Notre Dame just kind of, distanced, from each. I think it was kind of a mutual thing where, Wimsatt didn't really seem fired up to get to Notre Dame, and like, and then I'm sure Notre Dame, had their reasons to kind of cool as well. So again, it kind of looked like Angeli or Allar. Allar is interesting because he's I see this a lot with recruiting. Like some kids just kind of bust onto the scene and are the new hot toy and the new thing everyone's talking about. And then there's Angeli, who's your little bit more guy who's been around. He's been picking up offers for several years. It seems like, we went into a sophomore season with an offer from Ohio State in hand and Penn State. So Alar's the new shiny toy that everyone wants to see Notre Dame end up with. So Notre Dame fans like not excited about Steve Angeli. You should be. Angeli's a ball player. I think that there's a high upside. Is it as high as a Drew Allar? I don't know. Probably not. But I think his floor is high from what I've been told, and from people inside the Goog, and even my own interactions with Steve. The mental makeup, that's a real thing. His temperament, his demeanor, everything about Steve fits. What a Notre Dame quarterback should be. So. For me, guys, like I've said many times, though, he checks the boxes for me. Athletically, I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. I don't see how people don't think he's not a good athlete. The arm talent is a check for me. Don't think he has elite arm strength. I think it's certainly good enough, and will keep improving. The mental makeup's there. He's going to be great for Notre Dame off the field, ambassador for the program. Just everything here says this is a good get for Notre Dame.
I think so as well. And like, look, he's not out of place when you look at rankings of the guys who've committed to Notre Dame under Brian Kelly. There have been 19 when you include the players who decommitted and the guys who signed in that 2010 class, I should say, under Kelly, but committed initially to Charlie Weiss. 19 of them, 8 of them were Rivals 250 players, 3 others, including Angeli, 4 stars, but not in the Rivals 250. So certainly not out of place in that regard. And when you watch the clips that for a YouTube audience Mike just put up there and watch a little bit of his junior tape, you get the same kind of thing. He's like, this is not a worse player than Notre Dame's getting. And in that sense, he should fit in when you compare everybody else where they were as recruits. For what actually happens on campus, who knows? Every QB is a crapshoot unless it's Trevor Lawrence or someone like that. And that guy's not around every year or even every couple of years. And look, I know people have been fired up about Angeli's commitment, not in the sense about what he is or isn't, but how Notre Dame approached this and everything. And I guess I'll say this is if you want to quibble a little bit, I think you can do it in the sense of if you look around at some of these other positions and on defense and whatnot, you see Notre Dame taking all these big swings. And we've talked about that before on previous episodes where look at all the linebacker offers where you see, I think the number is 6 top 100 linebackers have been offered by Notre Dame since Marcus Freeman got there. They're trying with CJ Williams, the top 40 receiver out of California. I mean, again, who knows if these are any likely to work out, but they're taking the shot. Trying with Zach Rice, a 5-star offensive tackle. Trying with Nick Singleton, the running back, top 150 player who they're battling Ohio State for, and so on. Quarterback, you didn't really see that. I'm not sure I'd call Ty Simpson a big swing, even though, yes, he's a top 50 player who Notre Dame offered. But considering the timing of that from when he picked up the offer, I believe it was December, to when he committed in late February, it was more of a throw the bat at the ball and kind of hope there's contact there. So if you want to find something that could have been better or could have shot for the moon or whatever, and if we're just talking about rankings here, I think that's it. But then again, this is a tough cycle where you have to go with what you trust. Notre Dame stuck with that. It clearly trusted and liked Steve enough to make him the first player they offered in the 2022 cycle. And nowhere really in this was it a situation where it's like, oh yeah, this guy is like 15 players down or more. They liked him from the start. So even in saying that about, sure, you could like to see a bigger swing because those bigger swings, the more of them you take, the more of them you'll connect on. And from all that talk about closing the gaps or getting closer to the summit, you want to hit on some of those. But at the same time, I give Notre Dame credit here for sticking to what it could trust in a weird cycle and still getting someone who, like I said, it's not like you watch them or look at their rankings and offers and whatnot and say, oh yeah, he doesn't belong here. That's not the case.
Patrick, I love a good analogy. So I'm going to give you guys one. I might lose some of our audience here. They might lose respect for me and just tune out here. I watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette with my wife. It's something we just started doing last year, um, and so it's out there. I watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. So I'm watching on Monday night. Matt James is the Bachelor. He's down to like 4 women. I'm like, Matt, why did you just send this girl home? Why did you keep this girl? Like, I'm like, what are you doing, dude? And like, just think about they've been filming this Bachelor show for like 2 months, and I get 2 hours on a Monday night, and I just get a small little snippet that that ABC and the Bachelor producers are giving me when there's so much more out there that you just don't know unless you're Matt James and the women in that house that like you just don't know. So my analogy here is that like um I am the Bachelor and ABC producers trying to tell you guys as much as I can really about Steve Angeli, but the all of those things, like if you have quarrels about the Notre Dame staff and how they handle quarterback recruiting, like it's like I'm doing my best here, but like it's tough to like be actually in the, like to criticize those people who are actually in the rooms making the decisions. Like I feel like a lot of us are armchair and not only quarterback recruiting but so much in recruiting and college football, and just be like, well, I would have done better than that. Well, when you're actually like the person that's in charge of that, like it's a lot more pressure and it's a lot different than just me sitting here watching 2 minutes of highlight tape and saying, well, that kid's better than that kid. There's just so much more context. There's just so much more going on. Like I said, I try to talk to as many sources as I can, get the bottom of most of it as humanly possible, and then there's even things that I get that I can't share with you guys because it's just not appropriate, or sources would not talk to me anymore. Like there's just so many different things there. So you have to take like when I watch The Bachelor, I'm like, the producers are editing this to make this girl look bad or this girl look good. Like there's just so much of that stuff in life. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. Patrick, am I crazy here? Maybe am I just crazier for watching The Bachelor?
Yeah, that I mean, like that goes without saying. But and I, in any podcast that we have done or ever did, I did not think we'd get the Bachelor on here. Let it be known that that would be an endless supply of ribbing in future jokes at your expense on this podcast. But anyway,
Patrick,
the analogy works.
I tweeted out the word Michelle last night, and it was in support. I didn't want to put like Michelle hashtag The Bachelor, but for those who watch The Bachelor, they know that it was tweeting about my support of Michelle on The Bachelor. So I'm not hiding it anymore. I do watch The Bachelor with my
I,
wife. I'm not a single guy watching it by myself. It's with my wife.
wear it on your sleeve, man. Whatever you got to do. But that's it's kind of funny. Like you didn't even have to put that Bachelor hashtag on there, and yet there's probably a bunch of I'm just kind of guessing here, a bunch of people who understood exactly what that tweet meant. It's kind of wild how like Bachelor Twitter has just overtaken like mainstream Twitter, where you don't even need the sub community or like to have a certain number of followers where it's like, oh yeah, I know they care about that content. It just happens. I'm I'm not about it, but I digress. I'm not going to rant about certain sections of Twitter taking over mainstream Twitter. Anyway, your analogy is correct, and I mean basically to boil it down, in recruiting you only see the tip of the iceberg, like, and that's the case with Notre Dame's quarterback recruiting, and when you look at Steve, like what happened with other teams pursuing him, whatever. Like I mean, he had 20, whatever offers. I don't know, and we don't know, and won't know what was his pursuit like with Ohio State or that recruitment. What was LSU doing with him? What was Stanford doing? I don't know. But here's what I'll tell you with this: if you're trying to go down the rabbit hole that just turns into goalpost moving of, well, that they didn't want that kid, so it doesn't count that he had an offer or whatever. Look, the logo on the page tells you this, and this is just a factual statement. That school liked that player enough to tell him a verbal offer. That's that. That's not nothing. So take it for what it's worth. All right. And look, there's a lot of other quarterbacks out there that they could have told that to and didn't.
Right.
and ones who are going to play at a Power 5 level or something like that. So take it for what it is, which is still worth something. Where that team at one point liked that kid enough to tell him he had an offer, and whatever happened afterwards, there's a million other dominoes that caused that in each of those programs. So
Preach.
just leave it at that.
Preach.
It's yeah, exactly. Like that's it's, people just drive yourselves insane if you're trying to consistently go through each of these offers with all of these recruits or any recruit and just say like, oh that one actually doesn't count, or that one does count, or that one, well, they were about to offer, so well, really that should be on the page. Like, no, you guys are gonna drive yourself crazy. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot that's just never coming to light over why someone got an offer, or why someone passed, and or why a school passed on offering a kid, or why something deteriorated on as far as recruitment from one side or the other or both. It's just you just kind of have to assume people in the room are like operating with that kind of information and factoring that into their decisions. Which, like, come on, that's just basically doing your job. I don't think college football coaches don't do their jobs in that basic manner. So yeah, that's we don't know in full, but all we can do is look at the information we have and go from there. And yeah, either way, Notre Dame's got its quarterback, and whether you like it or not, that's it. We'll see what happens in 3 or 4 years.
I've got nothing to
add. Yeah, I mean, you've literally spent every waking hour not watching The Bachelor, talking about Steve Angeli for the last week.
Wow. That's how it's going to be? All right, let's move on.
Yeah, let's talk about Steve as a recruiter. You touched on it at the beginning of the show. The 2022 class, at least before his commitment, hadn't had one of those guys like a Blake Fisher who's all over Twitter and publicly tweeting to kids saying, join us, blah, blah, blah. Like that face of the recruiting class who's all excited, all energy, all the time. It seems like, Mike, that you think Steve could be that type of guy for the 22 class, like Blake was for the 2021 class. So tell us why and who some guys are that he might be targeting in particular, because he does have some relationships with guys in the Midwest, in addition to his home state of New Jersey.
I also want to add Nolan Ziegler, linebacker commit, 4-star player from Michigan. He's not a vocal guy just in general. Like, he's not a social media guy. Like, he's, again, not a publicly vocal guy, but he is busting his tail on the recruiting front, too. He's talking to a bunch of Notre Dame's top targets, so want to give some credit to Nolan Ziegler there. But in terms of that, that public face, like you said, Patrick, Steve Angeli is going to recruit A to Z, who the top targets are. It's not just an offensive thing. It's not, just running backs, receivers who I'm going to be handing the ball to or throwing the ball to, or who's protecting me. It's defensive targets. It's really everybody. Talked about this a good bit on his own team. Jaden Bellamy, Jaden Gould, a pair of cornerbacks. Bellamy is kind of one of these guys that could be a corner, nickel, safety. Notre Dame surely likes this guy as a defensive athlete. Jaden Gould, a big 6'2", 6'3" cornerback who, could end up as a safety, one of those guys who Notre Dame's taken a good bit of them, corners who could transition to nice, rangy safeties. And he's got connections in Chicago. He's played on the 7-on-7 team called Boom, based in that area. Tyler Morris, Caleb Brown in the 2023 class, Carnell Tate, all these guys, wide receivers, and guys that the Irish staff would love to have in the class. So, I mean, man, the list is long. All the big running back targets, Dallin Hayden, Nicholas Singleton, Gavin Sawchuk, the receiver names, the tight ends, Holden Stacey, Larry, and all these guys he's in contact with. So, like seeing that from Steve Angeli, even before he committed, he had told me, like, look, dude, I'm ready to commit somewhere so I can start recruiting. And I know that he wouldn't want to recruit for any other school than Notre Dame.
So you touched on some of those guys with involved with Steve, who know Steve, but in general, I mean, Mike, you just wrote a story today as we're recording this Tuesday, March 9th, detailing who might be next to commit. Usually you put 5 guys on these things. This one had 13. So, I mean, yeah, there's a snapshot into Mike's hectic recruiting life right now. But anyway, why don't you tell us about some of the names on here and really, well, why you felt you had to put 13 guys on the list? Because I assume you just, didn't want to do it to yourself, out of masochism that it took the time to write the story. But yeah, let's tell the people what they want to know and what they should know here about some guys you're looking at as possible commitments in the maybe not too distant future.
Yeah, so like you said, I usually do after each commitment, who's next. I'll look at 5 Notre Dame commit candidates. You can find this article at blueandgold.com with a premium subscription. So, folks, if you like our coverage here on podcast and YouTube and everything, you want to take the next step and being a recruiting nut, it is, signing up at blueandgold.com. It'll be worth every penny. So yeah, we're not going to go over the full list of 13, but I'm going to give Notre Dame fans 5 here to keep an eye on. And this is just in random order. But I figured, let's give you guys a hint, like a sneak peek. Who could be next to join the Notre Dame class? I think first, this one Notre Dame fans should be really excited about. Joshua Burnham, 6'3", 200-pound linebacker from Michigan. I'm not going to butcher the the city again, Patrick.
Traverse City.
Traverse City. For our YouTube audience, you see the future cast percentage here. That's 86%. That means a lot of folks feel like he's going to Michigan. You see the 6 Michigan picks in there, and there's Mike Singer, Notre Dame pick last week. And from everything I'm told, Notre Dame is looking really good in this recruitment, pulling off an upset. Here's an interesting thing, Patrick. His highlight tape is 30 minutes long. Usually if I see a 10-minute long highlight tape, I'm like, okay, Joe Schmo, cut it down to 5. No one has time to watch a 10-minute highlight tape. 30 minutes. The dude's a quarterback. He's an H-back. He rushes off the edge. He's an inside backer. That most latter position there is where I feel like he will play at the next level and where Notre Dame likes him at. But, number 5 inside linebacker in the country, number 141 overall player in America. This is a big-time prospect. His recruitment's down to Michigan, Notre Dame, and Wisconsin. This is a guy to keep an eye on for the Fighting Irish in the near future as well. We'll continue on. I'm just going to run through these 5, and then Patrick, you can tell me what you think. But next guy is Jaden Mickey. Recently bumped from 3-star to 4-star status on Rivals, number 35 cornerback in America. Announced a top 4 on March 8th of Cal, Northwestern, Notre Dame, and Oregon. I think those latter 2 schools, Notre Dame and Oregon, are the teams to beat here. We'll have an article on him at blueandgold.com on Tuesday, a freebie story for everybody to check out. And like in Notre Dame in this recruitment too, I think he could be another guy to keep an eye on that could pop to the Fighting Irish. I mean, this would be Notre Dame's, if he is going to commit, he'd be the first defensive back commit in the class. And I feel like once you get one, you might see a domino effect. So other guys I like for Notre Dame in the secondary, Jaden Gould, mentioned earlier, teammate of Steve Angeli's. Jaden Bellamy, another one of his teammates I could see at Notre Dame. Nakai Martinez from Florida is a 4-star guy inside the Rivals 250 at number 202. There's just a lot of corners. The board is just, on the defensive side of the ball, there's just so many guys. And we'll touch on another one. There might be 20 or 30 guys where I'm like, I see Notre Dame in the top 2 or 3 in this recruitment, but they might only have 12 or 13 defensive spots. So good problems to have here for the Notre Dame staff. Next guy, I put in a FutureCast pick for him on Monday night, DJ Wesolak, 6'6", 235 pounds, invited to the All-American Bowl in San Antonio, as well as the Under Armour Bowl, Under Armour All-America game in Orlando, Florida. 39 scholarship offers. This one feels like a Notre Dame, Clemson, Missouri battle. How often do you hear of that? And one that I like Notre Dame for right now. Conversations with Marcus Freeman, Mike Elston, and then those commits: Steve Angeli, Tyson Ford, another guy in Missouri, Nolan Ziegler. Notre Dame's really hitting Wesselak from all fronts. I think if you see any reports that Wesselak is visiting campus, maybe this spring for a self-guided deal, then I feel like Notre Dame fans, you have a reason to go from excited to just super fired up. So another name to monitor closely. I think you got to talk about Eli Raridan. I call him a double Notre Dame legacy because his grandfather was an assistant strength and conditioning coach. That's Scott Senior Raridan back in Notre Dame's championship winning season in '88. His father, Scott Jr., played at Notre Dame about 17, 18 years ago. So yes, he was a young father. And Notre Dame offered not too long ago, and I feel like Notre Dame's in the driver's seat in this recruitment. It's hard to see him not going to Notre Dame. If not the Fighting Irish, my guess would be Iowa, but like Notre Dame a lot for Eli Raridan. And then a new one, it's actually an old prospect for Notre Dame. He was Notre Dame's back in, I talk about the November 2019 a lot. That was a really important month for Notre Dame because they had so many recruits on campus for this 2022 class. Who would have known that Notre Dame wouldn't really be able to have recruits at all in 2020 except for just a couple months. So this is a guy who visited, I believe it was for the Navy game in 2019. He and Joe Brunner were Notre Dame's first two offers in the 2022 class at offensive line. So a long-time target for Notre Dame, year and a half. Jeff Quinn's been in pursuit of Carson Hinsman. He's ranked as the number one center per Rivals in his class, number 82 overall player in the country. But Carson Hinsman is a guy who could play guard, and I think in a pinch he could play tackle. So Wisconsin Notre Dame battle, it looks like here, and this is one I feel like the Fighting Irish have a very good shot of winning. So you look at those five guys: Josh Burnham, Jaden Mickey, DJ Wesselak, Eli Raridan, Carson Hinsman. Some fine prospects, Patrick, and there are several more. I have future cast picks in that we're not going to touch on right now. But I mean, Notre Dame's at 8 commitments right now. You got your quarterback, Steve Angeli. You got a running back, Jadarian Price. You got 2 offensive linemen, Joey Tanona, interior player, Ty Chan, and a tackle. You have Tyson Ford, a defensive end. Oh, you have Jack Nickel, a tight end. You have Nolan Ziegler. Is that 8? Did I just name all 8? Might be missing a guy off the top of my head, but you have to be excited about this class so far. And then there's just so many guys that Notre Dame's in this lead group for, and I seriously could see them by the time the summer hits with almost a full boat, in terms of how many they're going to take. Let's just say Notre Dame takes 25, I could see Notre Dame with 20 commitments entering the summer. Now, I don't know if that's crazy, but it seems to be the way things are trending.
So this is a really interesting year to be in that kind of spot, Mike, where you could have 20 guys, let's just call it the end of June, to say, be conservative here. But going off of that, 20 guys who could be in the class because there are so many, like you said, who Notre Dame's in that top group of 3, 4 at the most, which means it is a plausible situation where one of them calls and staff and says, "Hey, I want to commit," and like you said, something that could happen, before too much longer before the season, whatever it might be. And it's an interesting year to have that because of these dynamics around roster management and turnover that are specific to 2021 / the 22 off season, where one, you have the immediate eligibility transfer rule. So what does that mean? That's expected to pass this spring. What's that mean for guys after 2021? Or even does that usher in some more post-spring transfers that maybe someone wasn't willing to do if they know they had to sit out the season or anything like that? Where, all right, even if it's not looking great, you hang around for the year so you can possibly graduate next spring and take a grad transfer, and you don't lose an extra a season off your eligibility, or you lose a season that would have counted because you already redshirted or anything. I'm getting too far down the weeds of that here, but you have that might speed up some movement, and then you also have the needing to get back down to 85 from the free COVID year, and no one who comes back for 2021 using the extra year, which for Notre Dame is Jonathan Dorr and Kurt Heinisch, they don't count toward the 85. But let's say someone wants to use that extra year to come back for 2022, who would be out of eligibility. Let me just think of a quick example. Jason Indemilola, let's say, on Notre Dame. He would be out of eligibility after this 2021 season in a normal thing, normal year, normal world, whatever. But the free year allows him to come back. If he wants to do that, though, it counts toward the 85. So all of this is to say, like, you have a lot of these interesting dynamics for what the 2022 class size is going to be for every school. Like, all right, you have one in the COVID year where, all right, you think the class is going to be a little smaller because anyone who takes advantage of it, they take up a scholarship. But two, the immediate eligibility transfer, maybe it speeds up some things. So it's basically the point I'm trying to make here is it's going to be a really fluid thing for what are numbers in a class going to look like. And I would imagine that you'd have a lot of cases or a lot of coaches sitting up there in December on signing day saying, yeah, we back, in early spring, late winter, we thought this would be like a 17-person class. And here we are having signed 25 guys. So I feel like space is going to be an extremely fluid thing, even more than it normally will be.
Yeah, I think that's certainly plausible. And heck, in 2021, that class was supposed to be right around 20, and they signed 27. And I mean, yeah, if you're Notre Dame, you probably want to be conservative with your numbers early. Don't get ahead of yourself and start projecting, roster spots to open up that might not open up or something like that. So, yeah, I right now my projection's around 22 or 23 in this class. Could certainly see it getting to 25, 26, maybe a grad transfer somewhere. So yeah, I think that's certainly fair.
Which it makes you wonder, like, are they really gonna actually take 20 guys and end June, let's say, with 20 guys? If you have, say, 20 or whatever it is from 8 to 20, 12, I guess, they would want to commit by then. I don't know, because, like, again, if you're projecting for 22, well, then it's July and you got 2 spots. And again, it's just a hypothetical but plausible situation. Do you want to do that? I don't know. It just makes for a really interesting thing. And again, a lot of fluidity here.
Good problem to have if all your top
Yes.
guys want it, that's for sure.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, really every position on the board, I'm like, there's several guys. Even receiver, I feel like Notre Dame fans look at receiver recruiting and feel like it's a little behind right now. They don't have a commitment at the position. But there's like 3 guys off the top of my head that I could be like, I could see them committing in the next week even. So, this is going to be a busy spring. Write this down, guys. It's March 9th right now. Like, going into June 1, I would be stunned, as of today, if Notre Dame doesn't have, let's say, double their class, in the next, like they have 8 right now. I'm saying like 8 more commitments. Like, I think it's plausible they could have 20 by June again. So that would be 12 more. Like, I would be stunned if they're not going into June with 16 commitments.
Oh, you heard it here first, people.
I mean, in the 2020 class, they had all of their class but one guy wrapped up by July 5th. That was a really small class. Notre Dame ended up with, after the Landon Bartleson deal, I think they signed, 17? So yeah, they had 16 to 17, not counting Bartleson. And Ramon Henderson was the last guy, and he was pretty much, we knew he was coming most of the fall. He was just, kind of stretching things out. So yeah, it's I don't think it's crazy, but I think this fall is not going to be a lot more than babysitting the 2022s. One thing to mention, though, if visits do open up, Patrick, in June, or maybe they happen during the fall, I don't know, then, do you have commits for Notre Dame who want to go take visits because they haven't been able to visit any schools because of this dead period that's been going on for a year? Do you have, big time players at other schools that, maybe Notre Dame wanted but committed elsewhere, but now visits open up so they want to give Notre Dame a shot? A lot of different variables, guys. As always, recruiting and everything in college football is very fluid. I mean, like, who would have thought that Les Miles would have got canned, because of allegations and things he had done in his past? You just can't predict college football. It's just crazy. Unless you want to say Alabama's going to win a national championship in the next 3 years. That's a pretty good bet.
Yeah, we back in the summer, last summer, I should say, we were all predicting like, big flip miss at the end of the 2021 cycle. That was, of course, working under the assumption that visits would actually open up in, say, December 2020 or January 2021. That, of course, didn't happen. I think it would be a similar kind of thing if visits open in July or September or whatever it might be. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be stunned if that's not the case, where you have some Notre Dame commits, especially if it's high teens who want to go take some visits because they've literally never done it before, and the other way around, some guys who committed elsewhere who hadn't taken many visits who want to come check out Notre Dame, who Notre Dame never really stopped recruiting, like a Caleb Johnson kind of situation. Sure. Where they didn't stop talking to him after he committed to Auburn. And you have someone like that, say, in the 2022 class who wants to come check out campus and they can't, who's still committed elsewhere. Yeah, I think that's possible. But I mean, you mentioned a couple of those other names back there. I mean, Nakai Martinez, Jade Bellamy,
Yep.
Jake Gold.
Yep.
That's 3 4-star DBs. I don't know the last time Notre Dame brought in a class with that. That is a crack staff question for a later podcast. But the crack staff has some trivia. Do you know? And I wonder if this is or where this would rank in the all-time. And then no one's ever going to do this research. Please don't do it. DJ Wesolak, from a town of 8,000 people in central Missouri. Carson Hinsman, his hometown of Hammond, Wisconsin, is less than 2,000 people. I wonder what the smallest town Notre Dame's ever signed somebody out of is. Again, please, no one go do that research. I know it's a pandemic and we're all quarantined still and all that, but please do not do that.
Drop your comments, though, on YouTube. Tell us.
If you can think of someone off the top of your head, tell us. But
yeah, leave that 5-star review with your comment as well on podcasts. Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, maybe I'd encourage you, if you went back and say the last 5 years of the Kelly era, to see what the smallest town someone has signed with Notre Dame out of since then. I would bet Hammond, Wisconsin, Carson Hinsman, who of course hasn't committed to Notre Dame, but obviously there's a chance, like you said, Mike. I wonder where that would rank, or even Boonville, Missouri for Wesolak, where that would rank. But yeah, crack staff still came prepared this weekend, as it always does. Crack staff never takes any days off.
Never.
Doesn't spend any time watching The Bachelor. Just all research all the time.
We're gonna have a talk after this. Yeah, we're gonna have a talk after this. You're ripping me now.
Well, we're gonna sign off before it completely devolves into the Bachelor talk. But appreciate you guys listening again. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you'd be so kind. Subscribe to our podcast if you're listening on there but aren't subscribed to our channel regularly. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at @PatrickEngel_. You can follow Mike at @Rivals_Singer. Again, tell your friends about us. We appreciate you guys listening, watching. We will talk to you next week. Until then, take care.